Hello, hello. Happy marvelous Monday. It's not Monday. It's not Tuesday. It's Wednesday. It's Thursday. It is Friday Eve, everybody. Woo! We are a day closer to the weekend. Listen, I'm super excited that you're joining me live today, or maybe you're watching the replay. Listen, I am Carissa Span, the abundantly blessed landlord and tenant coach. I'm also a property management educator, and I am delighted today to share in a panel discussion as we are talking about maintenance repairs. And I don't know if you had an opportunity to check out the description, but it is what it is. Are you in hell in your rental home? Who is this segment for? This segment is for anyone who is a tenant, a housing provider, or maybe you know someone who is, or maybe you're looking to become either a landlord or tenant, or maybe you just tuned in just because. In any event, thank you so much. I am honored to have some amazing people as a panel today. We're coming back for round two. And the topic today is centered around maintenance and repairs. All right, so landlords and tenants, buckle up. I do want to say thank you so much for tuning in. I'm live on Facebook, I'm live on LinkedIn, and I'm definitely live on YouTube. If you have not already subscribed to my YouTube channel, please make your way over to my YouTube channel. You can find me there at Landlord Lyfe and smash that subscribe button so that you'll be the first to know when I am live and online. I'm subject to pop up live at any given moment. Okay. So again, thank you and welcome. So I'm going to pause, but again, I am honored to have some amazing people on my panel today. I ask that if you have questions, comments, remarks, or observations, don't be afraid to drop it in the comment section. Show me some love. Say, hey, girl. Hey, let me know that you're here. Let me know that you're tuned in. As a landlord, I want you to ask your questions. As a tenant, I want you to ask your questions, because here's the thing. I share information because my goal is to educate the entire rental community. I believe that it works better when we are educated and we are working together. And sometimes things are happening. Why? Because people just don't know. And so today, this segment is all about maintenance and repairs and asking the serious and the hard question: are you in hell in your rental home? And that question is applicable, if you think about it, for landlords as well as tenants. As a tenant, are you in hell in your rental home? As a landlord or a housing provider, are you in hell in your rental home? So that's the discussion that we are having today. So I'm going to bring on and introduce and present to you my panel for today. I have Tiffany, who's coming to the stage now. Thank you, Tiffany. I have Darius, who's coming to the stage. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining me today. I'm excited that you're here. We're having this conversation. Before I get started, I want you to introduce yourself. So Tiffany, I'm going to start with you first, and then I'm going to come back to Darius.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tiffany Moody. I'm pursuing a career in property management. So I'm just, a part of this class, getting all the information I can to pursue my career and be able to share this knowledge with those along the way.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Tiffany. Darius, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Darius Williams. I am also a student in Professor Span's class, and I am taking up a career in property management as well. And I hope that the discussion today will be a great discussion for us all to learn more and be able to share it as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So today I'm going to make sure my phone is muted. I want to start here because in order to understand the nitty-gritty of the discussion today, I believe that pictures and photos speak volumes. Would you agree?
Definitely.
All right. So what I want to do, and I see your comments coming in. Thank you so much. I'm going to respond to your comments in a little bit. I am going to ask that if there's anything, hey, well-versed, thank you so much, Carrie. What's going on, Miss Harrell? How are you, Lolisa? Thank you so much for tuning in. Hey, y'all. Hey, show us some love. What's going on, Moody Manda? Love it, love it. Hey, Tatiana. Thank you for tuning in. Hey, Lady Isaac. Thank you so much for being here. Hey, y'all. Hey, what's going on, Danielle? All right. Hey, Quita. What's going on, Miss Holmes? All right. Hello, Cherry. Cherry said, hey, girl. Hey, I love it. I love it. All right. So we're going to get into the discussion. But before I do, I want to show some pictures because I want you to see the condition that some people are living in. Now, this is a no judgment zone. Okay. This is a no judgment zone. So if you have questions, if you have comments, remarks, or observations, I'm here to answer today. And I do want to add that information that we share today is not legal advice. We are sharing our own individual perspectives and opinions. Okay. So let me pull up our first picture. Here's what I want us to discuss. So I'm going to pull up some pictures. I want you to take a look at it and let me know your thoughts. So for many of you who've been following me, you know that I've been in the rental property space, property management space for a while. I'm live every week. I'm typically live on Mondays. Sometimes I'll do an impromptu live throughout the week, the middle of the week like I am today. But I'm never surprised by things that I see and experience. Just today, before I pull up the pictures, just today, Darius and Tiffany, I was conducting some inspections in Baltimore, and I was utterly grieved by the conditions because, again, you know my heart, right? You've been around me long enough to understand that I care about people in general, and I was utterly grieved to see the condition that some of these families are living in. Didn't fault the landlord completely, and I didn't fault the tenants completely, which is why I believe that education is at the core. That should be the basic thing, because I believe that if more people educate themselves as a housing provider or a landlord or even a tenant, that can change the dynamics of that rental home. But let me share our first picture today. So I'm going to share this picture because I believe this is the title. This picture is connected to the title. So looking at this picture, let's talk about what we see, because there is a lot going on here, right? So this is someone's kitchen. Someone is actually living in this rental property. Okay, so let's talk about this. Let me start with you first, Tiffany. Let's talk about this picture here.
Well, for starters, as I see this photo, I'm just thinking, like, how did we get here? How did we get to this point where our home no longer looks like a home? How did we get in this space of, okay, whatever we're going through, we're taking it out on our property? And it has a lot to do with their personal mental health because of the writing and the words that they use to describe the feelings that they're feeling or whatever they're going through. They took it out on their property. And those who intend on renting a property intend on, just, doing what you have to do to get to where you want to be ultimately. So what I'm pretty much saying is, they're leasing out these properties to not make it a permanent home, but a temporary home. So why would you do that much damage to your temporary home?
That's a good question. I love it. Let's hear Darius' perspective.
So instantly I noticed that like everything is in disarray, and like Tiffany spoke on the wording on it. It seems like, yeah, they just took everything out on their apartment that they were going through at the time. But it also makes me just question, like, how long did this take? When were there no inspections taking place? How did it get this bad without, notice to from the property manager? Why did no one take time to like see about it?
Great points, great questions. So, Tiffany, I like the fact you brought up mental health, right? Because sometimes so let me take the position of a housing provider. as a housing provider, as an owner, as a landlord, whatever title people are comfortable with, right? It is always initially the owner's responsibility to know what's going on in that rental property. So with regular inspections, maybe the owner or the housing provider, the property manager, whoever, right? If they're conducting inspections, they would have noticed and identified that, hey, something is wrong here, because it's not just the writing on the wall. Let me go back to the picture. It's not just the writing on the wall, but it's also the hole in the wall. You have a cabinet drawer, the face of the cabinet drawer that's missing. Now, if you look at the stove, it should have a timer on it or a clock or something that's missing. Now, look at the wall, the brown and the yellow spot on the wall. So those are things to me as a housing provider that I'm definitely going to follow up on, especially the hole in the wall. Now, that yellow, that brown stain on the wall, let me just tell you that that's likely grease. It's grease. Maybe the tenant has cooked, and there's also some brown on that front left stove, right? I'm sorry, the top of that stove. That's likely grease. Now, those are concerning to me because if, let's just start with the grease buildup. Over time, as grease builds up, it could potentially start a fire. So that's number one. I want to make sure that, okay, even if there is a grease buildup, I'm helping this tenant to understand why it's important to clean the stove after they finish cooking and don't allow the grease to build up, right? So Tiffany, you talked about mental health. Sometimes there are things that we as housing providers can't do if tenants have mental health issues. However, I do believe that if we are aware, we know that maybe the tenant does suffer with some sort of mental health issue or disease or something, to get them to at least talk to a caseworker or to a case manager who could possibly help. Now, all tenants may not receive help, but in that case, what do we do? So I talked about the grease buildup. I talked about the hole in the wall, right? I talked about the cabinet cover, the face that's missing. When a landlord or housing provider go in there conducting an inspection and they see these things, it's their responsibility to make sure that it's taken care of. But let's talk about the hole in the wall. Well, we know that the hole didn't just magically appear in the wall, right? Something happened for that hole to get there. And so as a landlord, as a housing professional, as a housing provider, we should have conversations when we go into a tenant's property and we see these things. Have a conversation right then and there. Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Tenant, I noticed that there's a large hole in the wall. What happened here? Right? Because we want to understand what's going on. Sometimes you may hear, true story, I've heard it. Sometimes you may hear, it was like that when I moved in. Don't be surprised. You may hear that. And like I said, I've heard it. I've heard so much. But ultimately, landlords initially are responsible. Maybe follow up in writing. Let the tenant know if they're responsible for paying for the cost of the repairs, to let the tenant know, hey, listen, we're going to take care of this hole in the wall, but in accordance to the terms of your rental lease agreement, that you're responsible for this damage. We're going to make sure we get that taken care of for you because we care about you as a tenant and we don't want you living in these conditions. And so we're going to take care of it, but we will definitely provide you with the invoice or the estimate. And you follow up and make sure that you provide the opportunity for tenants to pay it either in full or maybe give them an option to pay it in maybe over time in a repayment agreement or something like that. But I think that those are easy ways to solve that. Let me go to some of the comments in the section here. Hello, Bishop Tucker. Thank you so much for tuning in. Happy Friday Eve. Hello, Bishop Charity. Thank you so much for tuning in. Miss Harrell said, yikes. All right. Cherry said, how did you get a hole in the wall? That's the number one question. That's the magic question right here. How did that wall get like that? Tatiana said, yes, there is like, were no home inspections done. Lady Isaacs definitely said fire hazard. Absolutely. Comment here, Eminem. I think if you know your tenants, it will help you to know how often you should conduct an inspection. Oh, that's so good. Tiffany, what you think about that comment there?
I think that's amazing because I have a relative, right? And she has a mental background, right? So she made them aware of that when she moved into her apartment. Now, it is on the leasing office to follow up during her inspections and things like that because she did speak on her going through mental breakdowns and things like that. So when your tenants know that you care about them enough to check in with them, and not even just to do an inspection, but to check in with your tenants, that goes a long way because that shows that, hey, I don't just care about my property, I care about you as an individual as well.
That's so true. That's so true. And that speaks to the heart of professionals. I love that. Love that. Let's go to our next picture because I want you all to see the nitty gritty of rental property. So in this picture here, this is a tenant's home. Someone is actually living in this home. Now, this is a refrigerator full of food, and most of this food is spoiled. There are roaches in the refrigerator. The refrigerator does not keep the food cold. So a lot of the food has spoiled. Now, what you don't see in this picture is that the refrigerator gasket is ripped and torn, which does not allow the refrigerator, number one, it doesn't close properly, and it's not functioning properly. So then my question would be, who's responsible for this? Is it the landlord's responsibility to pay for this tenant's food? Because everything is spoiled. The apartment is reeking with odor from the refrigerator. It smells like dead animals are in there. There are flies all over the place, right? So that's number one. And then the question is, as it pertains to the food, the nastiness and the filth, when does the tenant become responsible for taking action? So that's what I want us to identify here. And this, again, this is an actual tenant's home. Someone is living in this condition. Let's talk about that. Darius, what are your thoughts on that?
So for one, it's super like unimaginable to imagine that someone has to live like that. But I do think in regards to who's responsible, I do feel like it's an equal part. I feel like it starts first with the landlord, only because it clearly was a repair problem first before the food went bad. So I do think that they would need to be responsible for um, refunding or making that right in regards to like their food and paying for it. I do feel like that should be taken care of because it's due to the repair not being fixed, the refrigerator not being replaced. However, the filth and the upkeep, the tenant has to be held responsible at to some extent with that. I feel like they shouldn't be just let it shouldn't just be let go just because they're the tenant. I feel like the cleanliness and all of that actually causes the roaches and the insects and everything else that's wrong with the unit.
Great comment. And I like this question here. Lady Isaac, she said, oh, wow, can we fine tenants when they don't meet property requirements? That's a great question. Here's my answer to that. I'm going to answer with a question. What is in that rental lease agreement? And I always start with the question first, because here's the thing. We cannot enforce something that does not exist. So if it's not in writing that it's a violation of the lease, we can't say, oh, well, Mr. and Mrs. Tenant, your filthiness is a violation of the lease, and we never put it in the lease, right? And so it should definitely be in the lease. And if it is in writing, the tenant signed that rental lease agreement, we already know that it is a legally binding document. And so anything that violates the lease is a breach of the lease and can be enforceable potentially in court. All right, so here is our next picture. Moody Manda said, I think the tenant is responsible. As far as the gasket, both are responsible. Repairs are made by the maintenance if is the biggest word here, if the tenant reported it. The tenant could go out to Home Depot and get a gasket for $10 or $15. Perhaps some tenants don't know. Some tenants are not handy, right? They can go and get a gasket, but if they don't know how to install it, then them getting a gasket might not be in their best interest, because what is it going to do? Like just sit in a box up against the refrigerator or on the floor somewhere. All right, so let's go to our next picture here. Great point, great question. I'm pulling up this picture here. This is someone's bathroom. This is under the kitchen. I'm sorry, the bathroom cabinet. So we see this opening here. It looks like some work was previously done, some patchwork that was completed. But you see this large opening? That is a large opening. That's large enough for rodents to get through. Anything can come through that hole under that bathroom sink. Now, although we're talking about landlords and tenants, if you are a homeowner, you see these things, maybe this is the time to take action, right? Because this should not look like that. Somebody obviously started repairs and never completed it. And in a situation like this is a tenant's home. The landlord is responsible. As a housing provider, you are responsible for providing a home that's decent, safe, and sanitary. That is definitely not decent. That's not decent work. That's not sanitary, and it's not safe. It invites rodents to come in, which I promise you definitely don't want a rodent problem. Sometimes it's harder to get rid of those things when they enter into the rental property. True story, there was a tenant who lived in an infested part of the city. And she always complained that not mice, but rats were coming into the home. She complained that rats were getting into her son's bed and biting her son. She complained that rats had emphatically taken over her house. She had glue traps in the HVAC closet. She had glue traps in the laundry room. Not mice traps, but rat traps. She showed pictures of rats caught on the trap. Now, I don't know if any of you know what a rat is, but it's really large and has a really large tail. It's definitely nasty. And her home was infested. As a matter of fact, her home was so infested with rats to the point where, and I don't know when the problem started, like the whole neighborhood was just infested with rats. But the rats had been in that community for so long that it dug barrels under the home. So like there were holes in the concrete, like under like the slab of the shed and around the house, where the rats, they were just going under, and they just eventually started to chew through everything and came in the house. That is listen, that can be extremely costly, which is why I always say, listen, when you see something, do something about it. If you see something, say something as a tenant. Let your landlord know that these issues are existing, because sometimes your landlord may not know, right? Don't always assume that your landlord know everything that's happening at rental property. Now, if they're doing regular inspections, maybe they would know these things. But here's the thing: not all property managers, not all housing providers are inspectors, so they honestly may not know. So let me go to our comment section, and then we're going to get to our next picture. Yeah, the rats were biting the babies. That was ridiculous. Tiffany said, call the police. Daniel, I like your comment here. You said developers need to put more money into the builds instead of trying to build so quickly. I love that. Now, let me go back to this comment here. Agreed, a lot of these places are badly built, but let's speak to that for a minute, because you have some rental properties that may have been built like in the 60s or the 70s, and they haven't been completely renovated. Maybe the owners don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars to make an extensive renovation, right? They can do minimum repairs. So how do we solve issues there if landlords don't have the money to put into these rental properties? Because let me assure you that it's not cheap. When you're talking about a total renovation, a gut renovation, that is a lot of money. So how do we speak to that if some of these properties are outdated? They were built back in at a time where you and we were not even born, but tenants are living in these places. I like your comment, Danielle. Landlords need to care as if they live in these units themselves. Both parties are responsible for things like that. They should charge minimum rent. Ooh, that is good. So you're saying, Lolisa, that if it's an older rental property, the landlord should not charge $3,000 a month. Maybe they should charge $1,000 or $1,200 or something like that. Is that what you're saying, Lolisa? Okay. Let me know. Let me know your thought on that. They should prepare for what? They should prepare for that when they purchase and be proactive, not reactive. Absolutely. That's a good point. This is good. Eminem said they can get funding for it. So just depending on where that rental property is, there may be funding available, because true story, housing providers, property managers, do some research. You may be able to get funding from your local jurisdiction to make these repairs. So definitely check into that. Okay, so let's go to our next picture. So this is someone's kitchen. You see the wall behind that faucet there. Now look at that light switch above the base of that wall. Let me also add that this faucet, when the water is turned on, the cold water leaks. The owner has sent their handyman several times to go in and to caulk that area in that kitchen, allegedly. And yet this is how it looks. So let's talk about this for a moment. Who's responsible here?
I feel like the landlord's responsible, to be honest. Like at some point, like I just feel like the corking, like you said, whether you did it or not, is just not up to par. And I feel like it also is an electrical hazard. I see that in the comments, and the light switch being like that is it's a big hazard.
Yeah,
I agree as well.
Go ahead, Tiffany.
I've seen a lot of properties in the southeast area that looks identical to that. And you put a band-aid over a big hole, it just gets worse.
And I also feel like when you're dealing with water issues, it's like almost inevitable for it to end up being a mold issue. So I feel like, and then that becomes like a health hazard, and it just leads to bigger issues.
Definitely agree. I couldn't agree with you more, which is why it is so important. Well-versed says caulking isn't always a fix. Sometimes there's other damage, and that's so true. Because let's say, for instance, you have a wall, that was a kitchen. So whether it's the kitchen or the bathroom, you have a wall unit that is now separating from the wall. It is coming apart from the wall. Caulking is not going to fix that problem. Yeah, so I definitely like this comment here. Thank you so much for that, well-versed. So let's go to another picture. this is a tenant's floor. Now, this apartment has suffered water penetration. So this is from water coming into the apartment, and the owner never made the repair. He never fixed it. If you look at the top of this picture here, see that corner? There's a crack at the base of that wall, top left side of that picture. This is serious neglect on behalf of the landlord to allow a tenant to live in a rental property like this. The tenant is so frustrated and fed up that they refuse to pay rent. This landlord had the unmitigated gall to take the tenant to court for non-payment of rent, only for it to get to court level and this problem was exposed because the tenant said, hey, Your Honor, yes, it's true I didn't pay my rent, but I didn't pay my rent because my unit keeps flooding. I told my landlord that the floor is coming up and they did absolutely nothing about it. Let's talk about this. Tiffany, let me start with you first.
That floor looks like it survived an earthquake or something. If you look closer, you see like little blue specks of something on the floor. What is that from? Was that from the water, or how did that come to be on the floor?
Let's go back to the picture. So the blue specks on the floor, I'm not entirely sure what that is. That could be.
That might be from the floor coming up like that. That might have been under the flooring now that I look at it.
Perhaps.
Yeah, I think that is outrageous. And then the audacity to take someone to court. I'm pretty sure this tenant has sent them photos to show the landlord how bad the condition is. And honestly, I would have, personally, if I would have went to court, I would have asked the judge, hey, can I break my lease? Because this is ridiculous. Like, no, you can't walk on that floor. You can't. That's outrageous to have someone's property looking like that.
And this is something that a lot of people are not aware of. These are conditions that tenants are actually living in, because some landlords in housing, I call these slum landlords, refuse to make necessary repairs. All right, Darius, let me come to you for a second before we go on to our next picture.
Yeah, so I agree. I feel like the floors being like that is no reason that someone should have to live like that. I'm glad that they stopped paying the rent though, because a lot of people feel like, they can just deal with stuff and like the repairs don't meet the standard and they feel like, oh, I'm just gonna still pay rent, but you're actually entitled to like, have those repairs fixed. So I just feel like it's super sad that they had to live like that.
Absolutely. All right, so let's go to our comment section. Tatiana said she should have put it in escrow. Absolutely. Because here's what I would recommend, that as a tenant, any tenant who has some sort of housing code violations that they have communicated to their landlord has been a problem, and yet the landlord, the property manager, hasn't fixed it. Now, I know that the first thing that many people would think to do is to not pay rent, right? And so if you choose to not pay your rent, please make sure that you put it in a court registry, put it in escrow, because here's why that's important. And I love this comment, Tatiana, because as a tenant, you can withhold your rent, you cannot pay your rent, but then again, the landlord could also take you to court for non-payment of rent, although you have a valid reason for not paying your rent. But there's a way to do things legally. So let me put that in the atmosphere. Yes, she should definitely have started to put her money in court escrow, put it in that registry, so that when the landlord, the owner, takes you to court, you can honestly say, well, yeah, I will be paying my rent, but my floors are That's a tripping hazard. There's so many hazards going on in that apartment. So let me go to another picture and then we're going to get, I see your comments coming in. So give me 1 second. Now, although this may not seem like a big deal, this is really a big deal. Now, I've seen worse, right? I've seen worse, but let's talk through what we see. So this is someone's stove. This is their oven. We see that it's filthy. We see that on the far right side that the knob is missing. Now, if you look at the base of that oven, it is extremely filthy. There are discoloration of the stove. There's some yellow. There's some brown stains on the door, the top of the door, above the handle. Let's talk about this for a second, Darius. So in this situation here, who would be responsible? As a matter of fact, in the chat, let me know this stove right here, who's responsible for this? I want to hear your feedback in the comment section, and then I'm going to come to you, Darius.
Okay.
All right, so let's see your comments. Let's see what you have to say. All right, Lolisa said is the tenant's responsibility. Well, Verse says it's the tenant's responsibility. All right, Cherry, you said it's the tenant's responsibility. Lady Isaac, the tenant. Tiffany, tenant for sure. If you had a white stove, it should not be in this condition. Miss Harrell said it's the tenant's responsibility. So let me know in the comment section. Keep your comments coming in. Darius, let me come to you. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I definitely agree. The comments are on point. It's the tenant's fault. That is just upkeep. You did not get the stove like that. You wouldn't have accepted it. So why would you expect someone to want to take it back? So I feel like, yeah, that's just completely upkeep. They were negligent. They didn't clean it. Yeah, literally, it's all the tenant's fault for that.
So Tiffany, I'm not sure if you had an opportunity to check out that last picture that I showed of someone's stove. Did you see it? Okay, what's your thoughts on that before we go to the next one?
I think, when somebody gives you something, you should take care of it, especially if you're not intending on owning it. It's your fault, because that just looks like neglect. Like there's nothing that the leasing property could do about that to prevent that. Like I feel like it's their fault because they didn't take care of their stove like they were supposed to.
Let me pull the picture back up. So you're telling me that this missing handle is the tenant's responsibility?
Yes, if it wasn't given to them like that. So
Okay.
this is after, let's say this is after the tenant moved out, yes. But if this was before the tenant moves in, then no.
Okay, so let me ask this question here. So let's say, for instance, I'm your tenant. You come to my rental home and you see that the knob is missing. Do you leave it missing? Do you replace the knob for me, or you just let me just live in there with no knob on the stove?
Yeah, I feel like they definitely should approach the situation to approach how they would be preparing it. I don't think that they should ignore it and just keep it, just not have the tenant have one. But I also feel like it should be a conversation to what happened to it, especially if the tenant didn't put in a request or an order saying that it broke off on its, just from it being loose or something like that. I feel like, that even goes back to the inspections that we were talking about. If you have inspections, you would be able to see that. But if you don't have the inspections and the tenant doesn't report it, you're just going to find out at the last minute, just like anybody else would.
Absolutely. I totally agree 100%. I have one final picture to show. Let me pull that picture up. So we talked about the hole in the wall. We talked about the floor. This is someone's door. So here in this picture, this black tape covers a hole around that lock on the apartment door. Can you see to the right of that top lock? There's an opening. So the tape covers up the rest of that hole there. Let's talk about this in the chat box. Let me know. Let me know your comments. Is it the landlord's responsibility or is it the tenant's responsibility? This is someone's door. Let's go to the comments section. And then I'm going to come to you, Darius. I see you. Who's responsible? Where did the hole come from? Great question. Here's Cherry's comment. Cherry said it's the landlord's responsibility. Daniela's question, right, like what happened? Landlord, it's neglect on their part. OMG, absolutely. I'm going to show the picture again. If you're just tuning in, thank you so much. We're talking about maintenance repairs. Are you in hell in your rental home? Well versed says the landlord. Hello, Kathy. Thank you so much. You said the landlord. Lady Isaac, I would say both, but a tenant can get a new doorknob and replace it, especially if they broke it. Let's park here. Let's put a quarter in the meter and park here on this comment. So she's saying that the tenant should have gotten a new doorknob and replaced it. What's your take on that, Darius? I see your head nodding. What's your take on that?
Okay, so I don't know. I feel a lot of ways about this one, to be honest, because I feel like, so I first off feel like the landlord is responsible no matter what, in the case that this is someone's front door and like the safety of the tenant is now compromised. Now, for instance, if it was a situation like they broke it, they couldn't get in their house, a locksmith or like whatever happened, they couldn't get in and they did it themselves. That goes into like, how do you prove that? Do you guys have cameras that are actually showing the doors of your tenants for their safety? Because what if someone tried to break in and it's not at the fault of them at all? Like, who's good? Like, I don't think they should have to go to find a lock and find like replace all of that on their own. That's the landlord's job.
I do like Kathy's comment here. Kathy is saying the tenant should also notify the landlord. Great comment. That is the best. That should be the first choice here. Danielle, landlord and tenant. What if the tenant didn't report it? That's a good question. Good comment, rather. Stevenson, landlord should have took photos before the tenant moved in. Oh, that's a great point. I'm big on documenting the property. Okay, but let's talk about this because let me go back to Kathy's comment. Kathy said that the tenant should notify the landlord, but now let me pull this picture back up. Yes, I agree with you, Kathy, that the tenant should definitely have notified the landlord. But now, what happens if they did notify the landlord and the landlord did not make the repair? Or perhaps, going back to your point, Darius, if the landlord would have conducted inspections and noticed this. This is definitely, and although we don't know, look at the top lock. Let me remove that comment. Look at the top lock and look at the bottom knob. That lock looks new. That's not an old lock. So someone made a repair. Someone put that lock there. That's not outdated. Maybe I don't know what happened to the door, but all I know is that the lock is ill-fitting. Maybe the tenant had someone to install a lock because we know that sometimes tenants will change the locks, right? They'll change the lock and they don't want their landlords to have the key. Maybe this is what happened. I don't know, but all I know is this is unacceptable. So Let's go to the comment section. Residents should submit a maintenance request. Absolutely. Moody Manda said you can replace it and charge them depending on what happened. Absolutely. Because if it's tenant damage, if the tenant changed the lock, ultimately, here's the thing. Let me just say this. Ultimately, it is the owner's, it is the landlord's responsibility to make sure that that rental property is safe. That's not safe. Security is, I don't know what their rental lease agreement looked like, but I'm sure security is part of that lease agreement. And so as an owner, your number one responsibility is to make sure that your tenants can have a secure place to live in, right? So charge the tenant if you must, especially if it's in your lease. Send the tenant a letter. Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Tenant, first have that conversation if you can, because some tenants may not respect landlords. I get it. But where you can have a conversation, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Tenant, there's a different lock on this door that we didn't install. Do you know that that's a violation of your lease? No worries, we're going to replace it. I do want you to know, just so that you'll know in advance, that there may be a minimum fee to repair this door, right? So whether it's a repair or a complete replacement, have those conversations. And then when you follow up in writing, and you should definitely do that right away, and take pictures, right? I think it was Stevenson in the comment. He said, take pictures of the property. Follow up with a picture right away. One of the things that I always do whenever I'm doing a housing inspection or just walking in a tenant's home, I may not even be going for a housing inspection. If a tenant has a complaint, right? If let's say, for instance, something's going on with the tenant property, they're constantly leaving out of the property, they're leaving the door open, which makes it, makes the property a target for anything to happen, right? I'll go to address it. I always have my cell phone on me. Here's why I do that, because as I am going into these homes, if anything is wrong, I need to be able to document what's happening. So I have my phone, which does have a camera, and I'm going to take pictures. But here's what I do. I'll let the tenant know, hey, there's a hole in the wall. We're going to make sure we get it taken care of. I'm taking pictures because I need to document what we need to fix. So I'm communicating. I'm not just going to go in and just start taking pictures, because people want you to always respect their privacy. And you definitely don't want to just go in and start taking pictures. So I would say always explain in advance why you're taking pictures, because people can be really guarded. Like, why are you taking pictures of my place? Like, what's going on here? It's making me uncomfortable. It's giving me some kind of vibe I'm not comfortable with. So I like to communicate. I like to address issues. But when I follow up in writing, it's going to be a picture that is attached to that letter, whether it's a physical letter, whether it's email. I'm going to let the tenant know if I have to pay for it, and if it is a violation of the lease, it's going to cost you. Now, let me just say, those of you who are my students, as you are entering into the industry, maybe you're self-managing your rental property, maybe you're new in property management, or maybe you're seasoned and you're just not doing this. Always document it, okay? It should always be in writing. True story. My lease package, when I'm leasing a tenant up, which is something I don't do anymore, but when I'm leasing a tenant up, and most of my lease packages are at least 61 pages long. I was looking to see if I have a file in here where I can show you a lease. But true story, my lease packages are at least 61 pages long. Some people may say, oh, well, Carissa, don't you think that that's extreme? For you, perhaps, but for me, as a professional who makes sure that I'm going to cover my asset, I'm putting everything in writing. It's going to be clear who's responsible for utilities. It's going to be clear if there's a hole in the wall, what the cost is, because it's in the lease. If the toilet is broken, it's clear in the lease what I'm going to charge you for that. It's clear when I'm going to provide pest control services, whether it's quarterly. It's in the lease, and it's clear when we're coming to do housing inspections. It's clear, okay, if you have to pay utilities when you first move in, that's something that you should take care of, turning the utilities on in your name within 2 business days. It's clear, okay, if you have to pay utilities, the company that you need to call, if it's Pepco, if it's BG&E, if it's Washington Gas, if it's the water company, you have the company's name, you have the company's email address, you have the company's number. My lease package is extremely detailed because I want nothing left to imagination or to be unclear. Oh, well, I didn't know my landlord gave me a 2-pager lease and I didn't know that I was supposed to take the trash out. Well, some things I know a lot of people say, well, that's just common sense. You take the trash out, you don't let it sit in your apartment, right? You don't let maggots just start crawling. You don't let roaches start, becoming out of control. You take the trash out. You do these things because it's common sense. Well, common sense is just not so common for everybody. Let's go to the comment section, and then I'm going to come back to you, Tiffany and Danielle. I'm sorry, Tiffany and Darius. I see Danielle's comment. Sorry about that. Danielle, she's holding up her cell phone, honey. Absolutely. Kathy, the landlord is negligent if the tenant notified the landlord. I couldn't agree with you more. However, it should look aesthetically pleasing and secure. Absolutely. Great way of going about it. I feel like it should be illegal for tenants to make their own repairs. And in many cases, it is. That's why enforcing the lease is important, which is why it goes back to my point about my 61-page lease. You cannot enforce something that does not exist. So if the landlord never included in the lease what the tenant is responsible for, they cannot enforce it. You can't take a tenant to court for something that you never told them about. And just because you verbally gave them that FYI, maybe they remembered, maybe they didn't remember, but you can't enforce something that does not exist. Tatiana says she agreed with being detailed in the lease. Absolutely. Now, here's the thing. For those of you who are housing providers, and let's say you don't currently have it in your lease, and perhaps it is time for your tenant to do a lease renewal. Now might be the time to add that language to your lease. Sometimes minor. Wow, she's addressing a company here. Some things minor. Okay, well-versed said you want to protect yourself with the lease. Absolutely, because it is a business. And I believe that as a business owner, that if you treat it like a business, it should pay you like a business. And when you treat it like a hobby, it should pay you like a hobby. If you're a housing provider and if you are not conducting inspections, if you're not making repairs, you're not treating your business like a business. Your heart is not really in it, right? But let me go to you, Darius. Let me come to you.
Yeah, I agree with everything. Like, you got to protect yourself. If it's not in the lease, I would definitely take heed to that. Like, just put in everything in it. Anything that you can really think of that you don't want to be held liable for is best to put in the lease to protect you and to also just ensure that the tenant doesn't feel or is not being like bamboozled or swindled, I guess we'll say.
That's a good point. I see your comments coming in. I'm coming to you in the comment section, Tatiana. Tiffany, did you want to add to that before I go back to the comment section here?
Yes, I do feel like, you know, even when you're changing property managers, everybody should know their lease word for word because, like you said, when you go to enforce something and it's not in the lease, you make yourself look like the idiot in the situation because with a property you have to be detailed because like you said people can say, oh, I didn't know I needed to take out my trash, or I didn't know I needed to clean this, that, and the third out. Like for me, for instance, like I've experienced a situation where um all the tenants on the left hand, like it's a division of the left and the right. So on the left hand side, all of the tenants share the same pipeline. So one tenant put some type of oil or something down their drain, and it came up in another tenant's sink. So it filled their sink with whatever the person put down their drain. Now, I don't know if that's in the lease agreement to say, hey, don't put oil down your drain, but it's just common sense as well when it comes to living in a property. Like you should know these things before you go and rent an apartment.
That is a good point. Okay, let's say I'm your tenant, Tiffany. This is my very first apartment. I've never lived in an apartment. I've never lived on my own. I've always lived with somebody else, and no one ever told me to not pour grease down the drain. It's
Mhm.
not in my lease. Nowhere in my lease does it say I should not pour grease down the drain. So why are you saying that I'm responsible for my kitchen sink backing up and it flowing to my neighbor's apartment or house? Like, what does that have to do with me? And why are you telling me I have to pay for this? It's not even in my lease. How do you address that situation?
Well, I would address it as first saying, letting them know, hey, that is not okay to do that in any circumstances. Because what you're doing is you're causing your drain to back up and it's affecting your neighbors. We would hate for that to happen to you. But I understand that this is your first apartment, so there are some things that we do have to go over. Also, that will be a part of your lease when you come to renewal because we want to make sure that everything is clear and that you have a clear understanding of our expectations for our property.
Beautiful, well spoken, well said. That's a perfect way to handle that situation. And I think that having a heart in this business is definitely going to, I see your comments coming in. Having a heart in this business and what you do as a housing professional, as a housing provider, it will really catapult you to being extremely successful when you have a heart for tenants. Because some, we can look in the comment section, somebody doesn't have that same sentiment, right? They don't have the capacity to talk to tenants in a nice, gentle, and caring way. Tatiana said slumlords. Absolutely. I do believe that education is important in a rental community. This is why I do what I do. I'm a housing educator. I'm live every week. I'm live on Facebook. I'm live on YouTube. I'm live on LinkedIn. And again, if you have not subscribed to my YouTube channel, please do so. I'm not selling you anything. I'm just telling you that you should be educated. If you have questions, you can always drop it in the comments section, whether I'm live or not, because I go back and I read the comments and I respond to that YouTube channel. There you can find me, Landlord Lyfe with Carissa Span. Landlord Lyfe is spelled with a Y. So please go back, watch the replay, share it with somebody else. I do hope this was helpful for somebody. I was honored today to have a panel, Darius and Tiffany. I'm going to, Darius, let you have your last comments, and then I'm going to come to Tiffany.
Okay, I want to start off by just saying that this was a great panel. I definitely enjoyed it. It was also interesting to hear everyone's opinions. It also gave me like a different outlook and insight on some of the things that we reviewed today. And thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Darius. Thank you, Jack, for tuning in. Sometime the drain can back up from outside. That is a good point. Absolutely. Okay, so let me come to you, Tiffany, for your last comments.
I want to say it was a pleasure. I thank you guys for having me. Thank you, Professor Span, for inviting me on. And I hope that we all gain some sense of knowledge from this conversation. And I look forward to many more conversations with you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that, Tiffany. Thank you again, Darius. Listen, I hope that this was helpful. I was honored to have a panel today. Just being in the midst of some great minds. Many of you know that I'm a housing educator. I teach property management. I've been in the industry for well over 20 years, working in different roles and capacities as a property manager, a real estate agent, a housing inspector. Um, I have always specialized in affordable housing. And so I am always honored. I'm grateful. I'm thankful. I'm blessed to be able to share and make a difference. I strongly believe that we can do it better when we do it together. And so these segments that I do, they are for landlords, they are for tenants, and they are for those of you who just want to chime in and you want to get information. And maybe you're not a landlord, maybe you're not a tenant, but maybe take some of what we are sharing, take the information that I provided, take this free education. It costs you nothing but your time to show up and to get this information, because here's what I do know, that what you don't know as a landlord, as a housing professional, as a housing provider, whatever your title is, right? What you don't know can and will hurt you, and in jurisdictions that are pro-tenant, such as Washington, D.C. As a housing provider, it is definitely in your best interest to know how to handle situations to minimize the impact, because sometimes mistakes can be extremely costly. I've said it earlier in the year, this year as well as last year, that we are definitely going to see a lot more lawsuits because tenants are now recognizing and understanding their rights. As a housing provider, I want you to know as well your rights and your responsibilities. And so the question I pose today is, are you in hell in your rental home? Some landlords, they feel like they are in living hell because tenants are not doing the right things. Tenants are not taking care of properties, right? But even in that, have conversations, educate your tenants, talk to your tenants, follow up and enforce the lease. As tenants, are you living in hell in your rental home because your landlord is just simply not taking care of repairs? And so I hope that something was helpful today. Please make sure that you tune in each and every Monday. You can find me here. I'm live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. I'm Carissa Span, the abundantly blessed landlord and tenant expert. It's been a fantastic pleasure having you to join me. And if you're watching the replay, thank you so much. I hope that you'll join me next week. And to all of my students, I look forward to seeing you back in class. Everybody have a great evening and be blessed. Bye for now.